I think in big picture, how the industry's shifting is that people are moving beyond virtue signaling. It's not just about kind of doing the right thing, getting a green sticker, getting a pat on the back. People want data, they want measurement, and they want verification. And so having a really high quality third party verification process that gives customers that data that they need is really crucial.
Welcome to Science with a Twist, a podcast for curious people who enjoy exploring how science impacts our daily lives. From innovations in biopharma and diagnostics to technology that improves food safety and fuels advances in clean energy, it's all thanks to science. In each episode, members of Thermo Fisher Scientific's team talk to experts who are defining the next advances in science and technology that enable us to thrive. Let's get started.
Welcome to Science with a Twist. I'm your host, Terri Somers. Today, we're delving into the intersection of environmental sustainability and science in laboratory environments. Why is the environmental impact of laboratories important? Well, laboratories consume up to 10 times the energy and 4 times the water of typical office spaces. The healthcare sector contributes 4.4% of total global greenhouse gas emissions, with 71% of these emissions stemming from the supply chain or the complex network involved in getting a product from raw materials to a customer. And as this industry continues to grow, projected to reach 3.9 trillion by 2030, the environmental footprint is expanding proportionately. This growth underscores the urgent need for action. So what can laboratories and life sciences companies do to reduce their impact on the environment? We're delighted to have two guests with us today, James Connelly, CEO of the nonprofit organization My Green Lab, and Alyssa Caddle, Director of Global Sustainability at Thermo Fisher, to shed light on this topic. James will help us understand how My Green Lab is working with companies to build a global culture of sustainability and science, and how they have inspired tens of thousands of scientists globally to make positive changes in their labs to reduce the environmental impact of their work. James is a visionary sustainability executive. Over his career, he consulted with and developed sustainability programs for some of the world's largest companies and institutions in multiple sectors. He was selected as Green Biz 30 Under 30 Sustainable Business Leader in 2017 and a Net Zero Energy Trailblazer in 2019. And he is passionate about rapidly catalyzing a global transition to net zero. Alyssa Caddle will explain Thermo Fisher's approach and commitment to sustainability and how collaborations like the one we have with My Green Lab help drive success for both us and our customers. Alyssa is a director on the global sustainability team at Thermo Fisher with an extensive background in the space. Her primary focus is working with Thermo Fisher's many suppliers to reduce carbon emissions, as well as enhancing the corporation's efforts in labor and human rights and responsible sourcing. Welcome, Alyssa and James.
It's great to be here, Terri.
Hi, Terri.
James, let's start by learning a little bit more about you. How did you become interested in sustainability in healthcare and the life sciences?
Great. Well, thanks for asking. And, sustainability really bit me at a young age. My mom was a school teacher, and she really liked to get me and my sister out into nature in the environment where I live in the Pacific Northwest. And I learned about the legacy of mining and pollution and industrial impact and how it was impacting my community. And actually, when I was 12, I made a little documentary about it that was on the local news. So it's been sort of part of my DNA for my whole professional career. I studied architecture. I worked on developing some of the green building standards for China under a Fulbright fellowship. And then I worked at an organization called the Living Future Institute that piloted some of the first concepts of net zero energy and zero carbon in Seattle. People told us we were crazy at the time, that you'd never have a net zero energy building and that a zero carbon company wasn't possible. We've come a long way in a decade, and it's been incredible to see. I first started learning about sustainability in life science when I met the founder of My Green Lab, Alison Paradise, through a mutual friend. She was a Harvard-educated neuroscientist that was just fed up with the environmental impact of research, and she wanted to do something about it. So I actually became an advisor to that organization, joined the board. And then when she decided to pursue some personal passions, the board asked me to take on the CEO role 5 years ago. And it's been an incredible transformation of our organization. We've grown from 3 to 30 people, from less than 100 labs to over 3,800 labs in 51 countries. And I started to understand the overall carbon impact of biotech and pharma. And I wanted to do some research on that topic, actually, because nobody had ever published any data on what the impact of our industry was. So we produced the first report measuring the total carbon impact of biotech and pharma, looking across all 3 scopes of impact. And we found it was close to 400 million tons of CO2 equivalent, which is roughly equivalent to 1,000 natural gas-fired power plants. So we know that we need to do something about it. Labs are resource-intensive spaces, and life science overall has a big environmental impact. The exciting news, however, is that we've really reached a tipping point. And in fact, in our most recent report that released at the Global Climate Conference, we found that 33% of the 149 companies that we analyzed already had net zero targets aligned with a zero carbon pathway. So we're seeing really good progress in the biggest companies. And I believe firmly that life science can and must be a leader on these issues. We have the culture of innovation, the resources, and we can actually serve as a model for other industries to follow suit.
Alyssa, tell us about how you became interested in sustainability.
Sure, Terry. So I would say that my journey to sustainability in my career was a bit more accidental, perhaps, than James, and a little later in life. So I went to school for mechanical engineering and joined the workforce working in a technical supply chain role in the electronics industry. This was right around the time that the first hazardous substance restriction laws were coming into place to help really confirm and reduce the amount of hazardous substances in electronics products. So that was my first exposure to seeing how traditional business models could, in fact, be changed and could have a positive impact by removal of hazardous substances, which is something we still work on today. So it's been a circuitous path in almost 20 years since, but it's included sustainability work in the electronics sector, doing some really cool, fun projects as an engineer, working in returnable packaging and reusable packaging, and getting exposure to what it means for a life cycle of a product or package to really be optimized, and then into some corporate sustainability, carbon accounting and reporting, always with a strong tie to the supply chain and thinking not just of the environmental impact of our business in the supply chain, but also the human impact through our supply chain and the work we do. So I've done work in the electronics sector, I've worked in the apparel supply chain, and now for the last 3.5 years, I've been here at Thermo Fisher. So the life sciences is new to me, newer than James, but the principles of sustainability and particularly environmental sustainability to me are so compelling because they really do go across so many businesses, but the principles at the end of the day really do transcend any industry vertical.
It's clear that reducing greenhouse gas emissions and their central role in climate change makes this a key focus for sustainability programs. Alyssa, can you explain the basics? Perhaps you can start with what's meant by scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions and why we think about carbon in that context.
Sure. When we think about greenhouse gas emissions accounting, or some vernacular we would call carbon accounting, this is really to make sure that an organization can understand where its greenhouse gas emissions come from in various stages of their entire value chain. So at our core, we think of scope 1 emissions. These are the emissions that come from burning fossil fuels or using refrigerants in your own manufacturing or office footprint. So scope 1 emissions, companies typically have a very direct control over, and yet they're typically the smaller portion of most companies' emissions, even if you're a large manufacturing company. Going beyond our 4 walls, we have scope 2 emissions. These are the emissions that come from the generation of electricity that's used by our business. So electricity can obviously come from a traditional fossil fuel combusting power plant or from some sort of renewable source. And so in that case, we often typically use more electricity and have a little bit less control, but still have decent control of how we source our electricity as a company and how we can make choices to improve that Scope 2 footprint by investing in renewable electricity. And then our Scope 3 footprint is our largest footprint. And this is really all the other decisions that a company makes beyond its four walls that contribute to the generation of greenhouse gas emissions. So this goes in through the entire value chain, from our very first raw materials, like you spoke about, Terri, to how those materials are moved into and throughout our plants and along various steps of the supply chain. It even accounts for things like how our employees get to work every day, the business travel of our company, the greenhouse gas emissions associated with the waste that we generate as a manufacturer, and then how our customers use our equipment and instruments during their useful life and how they dispose of them or perhaps recycle them or are able to reuse them at the end of their life. So this is really the broadest set of emissions. And James mentioned it, these numbers can get really, really large, right? And that's because we're thinking about every business decision that we could be making as a company and what those emissions impacts are. So in those cases, we often have the least amount of influence, but still the number is very large. So we still want to make change in those areas because the materials we choose to buy, the routes we choose to send those materials through, the way that our employees work and interact with the company, the way our customers use our equipment, how much energy does it need? All of these things are things where we still have an influence and can make a difference, even if they're not happening inside our four walls. So at the core, that's where when we talk about Scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, that's what we're accounting for. And what's really important, and James mentioned it in his study, is that Scope 3 emissions are huge as a function of the whole. In fact, at Thermo Fisher, they're probably upwards of 90% of our entire carbon footprint. So even though we have less direct control, it's still really imperative that we're thinking about across our company how all the influence points we have along the value chain.
It's very helpful. Thank you for explaining that. Now, could you please explain Thermo Fisher's overall approach to environmental sustainability?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So when we think about environmental sustainability here at Thermo Fisher, we're really focused in three broad areas. The first being climate and our influence on climate change through our greenhouse gas emissions. Our second is our nature portfolio, which is how do we think about waste and water and our impacts on nature. And the third is a portfolio or a program that we call Greener by Design. And this is really thinking about how do we transform the innovation around our product and service offerings to make sure that the things that we're bringing to bear for our customers are optimized and considering different environmental impacts depending on the type of product. So within that three-tier structure, we do have several corporate goals. Specifically, I can speak to the ones around climate, which is we are committed as a company, like many others, through the Science Based Targets Initiative to be net zero by 2050. And that includes at least a 90% reduction in absolute emissions across all three scopes that we talked about earlier. So that's a really ambitious endeavor for any company, especially one as large as Thermo Fisher. But to make sure that we keep ourselves on pace and that we don't look so far into the future at 2050, we also have near-term goals. And so that's for our Scope 1 and 2 emissions to be reduced by 50% by 2030 as compared to 2018, to make sure that we're utilizing at least 80% renewable electricity by 2030. And then within our Scope 3 emissions, the largest amount of our Scope 3 emissions comes from the materials we buy from our suppliers. So in the near term, what we're looking to do here is to get 90% of our suppliers by spend to set their own decarbonization targets, because when they decarbonize, our Scope 3 decarbonizes. In the same way that when we decarbonize, that's our customers' Scope 3. So this continues all along the value chain. And so enabling and educating our suppliers to set their own carbon reduction goals, make sure that we're kicking that flywheel and keeping that progress rolling all the way up the supply chain. So beyond climate, we also have some goals related to waste and water, as I mentioned, as part of our nature portfolio. So when we think about reducing waste, our target by the end of this year is to have 30 zero waste sites across our enterprise, which is a pretty substantial network of manufacturing locations. And then when we think about water, we're really focused on making sure we understand and assess where we have sites in water-stressed areas and making sure we're doing water assessments in those areas of water stress, since in general, water is a very localized issue when we think about environmental sustainability. So we do have a broad portfolio of goals. I know later on today, we'll talk more about the Greener by Design program as well, and how we're excited to work with James and his team to bring some more differentiated product offerings and ways to demonstrate that environmental improvement in products through the My Green Lab Act Eco-Label program.
James, tell us more about what My Green Lab is all about. What programs support a company like Thermo Fisher in its ambitions to reduce environmental impacts?
Yeah, so My Green Lab is a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and our mission is to build a global culture of sustainability in science. We do this through education, community engagement, and market-leading certification tools that really are ways for companies to measure where they are, benchmark their performance, make improvements, and then verify those improvements so that they can make a credible third-party claim to the market and in support of their customers' objectives. So the first program I would talk about is My Green Lab certification. My Green Lab certification is considered the world's most trusted Green Lab certification, really the gold standard for Green Lab certification around the world. It's a process where we actually engage with researchers themselves and laboratories and scientists and all the people that support research in a continuous improvement process where we benchmark performance versus their peers, and then we provide a series of recommendations, and then we actually come in and we verify that they've achieved a certain level of performance. And now in our new tool, we also provide them measurements of how much energy, water, chemical savings they've been able to achieve and the financial return on investment from that effort. However, we quickly learned, and that program's been a great success. However, we quickly learned you really can't have a green lab unless you can buy green products. And so My Green Lab created the ACT Eco Label really to be the first independent third-party standard that could benchmark the sustainable performance of laboratory products and supplies. In fact, Thermo Fisher was one of the earliest and is currently the most significant participant in that program, using that benchmark both to evaluate their products and make improvements, as well as demonstrate that they've achieved a certain level of performance to their customers. So both of those programs have actually been evaluated by the EPA recommendations on standards and eco labels. So the EPA actually put together a process by which they took the private world universe of standards and they evaluated to make sure they met international best practice. So you can be assured that those tools and programs meet the highest levels of accountability, transparency, accuracy, and verification procedures that align with really where the whole world is moving when it comes to environmental certifications. That's not all we do, though, as an organization. There's a huge component of our work that's really about just education and awareness. We have an annual conference every year, the My Green Lab Global Summit. It's online, free for anybody to take part of. We had over 1,500 registrants last year. We have a My Green Lab Ambassador program, which is sort of like a crash course, a fun way with a series of videos to get introduced to sustainability. We have over 9,000 people that have gone through that program in 72 countries. They almost usually become kind of like the de facto experts of sustainability within their organization or their lab. And then we have a more in-depth educational program called the My Green Lab Accredited Professional, which is the first professional designation for individuals that want to demonstrate their expertise on sustainability. One last program I'll mention that's sort of near and dear to my heart because it's just such a great way for people to take a first step into sustainability is our International Laboratory Freezer Challenge. This is a fun, friendly competition where we get labs all over the world to compete to better manage their cold storage. It turns out through chilling freezers up from -80 to -70, defrosting them, making sure you're removing old samples, you can actually save a ton of energy and therefore a ton of carbon. We're very proud of that program. We had over 2,000 labs participate last year and it's continuing to grow. And actually Thermo Fisher has been a supporter of that program for a number of years as well.
Alyssa, how have you seen My Green Lab help Thermo Fisher move forward with its sustainability journey?
Yeah, so I think we've been a pretty active participant with My Green Lab in almost every facet that James just described. So we've been working together with My Green Lab since it was founded in 2013, and probably starting first off with the My Green Lab certifications for our own lab. So as you can imagine, we are a strong workforce of over 100,000, many scientists, many working in labs of our own. So we have over 50 labs within our Thermo Fisher footprint that are certified, and we're really proud of that. And it serves as a really good employee engagement metric as well for our lab bench scientists to involve themselves in the corporate sustainability objectives, which is awesome, along with the freezer challenge. So those are two kind of flagship ways that we engage with My Green Labs. But as James mentioned, we're also really excited, and particularly in my team, doing a lot of work this year to expand our use of the ACT eco label for our products. So we're hoping to have over 1,000 products labeled through the new ACT 2.0 eco labeling program before the end of the year. And this is really core to us because this is how customers can make informed decisions, right? And James, I hope that you'll forgive me if I use this analogy, but I think it really works for folks that might not think about sustainable purchasing every day. Is when you head to the grocery store and you're just trying to decide, and, some of us are busy parents at home, and you're holding up the two things and trying to make a decision. What helps you guide that decision? Is it the front, the flashy badges and labels? No, it's the back. It's the nutrition label on the back that informs you about the actual attributes of what you're buying. And that's what the level of detail that the ACT eco label goes into. It really explores all the different environmental impacts that a product could have and helps the consumer, our customer, to make an informed choice. So I'm really excited about that program. Really believe in the importance of third-party certification, right? It's great that we could talk about how green or sustainable our products are, but it's better when we can go into a third-party program and get that validated. So we're excited about that. And then, of course, James mentioned other educational programs, not only for our employees, but also for our customers, right? So if we want to get our customers to buy these projects, we need to teach our customers what it means to be a sustainable lab and how they can get involved. So using the educational resources of My Green Lab is another great way that we can really multiply our impact. So beyond our four walls, we can also inform our customers.
Well, Alyssa, you mentioned earlier the importance of Thermo Fisher suppliers in helping the company attain its environmental goals. Is there a connection between Thermo Fisher suppliers and the work of My Green Lab?
Certainly. So in several ways. And if we think about the ACT eco labeling program as an example, ways that our products will be able to achieve, better performance in that program partially comes from the raw materials we choose to buy. So working with suppliers that are able to provide those raw material inputs to us that are preferred is a great way that they can be engaged in the program. And then, of course, we also often are a buyer of life sciences products ourselves. So opportunities for purchasing reagents or other lab consumables, we can look to the ACT label as a guiding light, or we can look to a supplier's programs. Of course, we also, like we mentioned earlier, we're asking suppliers to set their own decarbonization targets. How do they decarbonize? Well, if they have labs, they can decarbonize by participating in the My Green Lab certification programs themselves. So it really does work kind of in a cascade motion up or down the supply chain. So in the same way that our customers can use it for purchasing decisions, we can use it for purchasing decisions with our supply partners.
James, technologies supporting sustainability continue to evolve. And meanwhile, the global understanding and perceptions and expectations surrounding sustainability efforts fluctuate and mature. How does My Green Lab help companies navigate this constant change and do it in a way that enables them to meet or surpass their sustainability mileposts and thereby realize a return on their investment?
Yeah, that's a great question. Our standards are always evolving. And actually, one of the features of a high quality environmental certification is that it's regularly updated and revised. And we actually do that through an expert steering committee. So it's not just us, it's the experience of the thousands of labs, the dozens of companies that have gone through the ACT label program, outside experts that shape our programs. And we actually just launched 2 new revisions and updates to both My Green Lab certification, My Green Lab certification 2.0, as well as ACT 2.0, which Alyssa just mentioned, and Thermo Fisher has a significant commitment to and was one of the early pilot participants, as well as being on the steering committee. So I think in big picture, how the industry's shifting is that people are moving beyond virtue signaling. It's not just about kind of doing the right thing, getting a green sticker, getting a pat on the back. People want data, they want measurement, and they want verification. And so having a really high quality third-party verification process that gives customers that data that they need is really crucial. And the importance of measurement and verification, well, maybe it takes more effort up front, is that then gives you the data on what the actual benefit is, the return on investment. So in My Green Lab Certification 2.0, we have an impact estimator that actually allows you to measure the energy, water, chemical savings, and then quantify the carbon reduction benefit as well as the financial savings. And we're seeing for commercial labs greater than 5x return on investment in 1 year alone. How we win in the sustainability movement is when it's not just the right thing to do to reduce your environmental impact, but it's the right thing to do from a financial perspective too, and from a business perspective as well. And that's really where we're positioning and how we've evolved these new tools to have measurable benefit and ROI. Ultimately, also, this is where consumer sentiment is shifting. And we did a market research study with Frost & Sullivan looking at over 500 lab managers. And what we found is that 85% of lab decision makers actually expect their vendors to support them in reaching their sustainability goals, both now and into the future. You can't have a green lab without green products. So people operating these green labs, they need their vendors to support them and partner with them to bring new solutions to the market if they're going to achieve their objectives. 91% of respondents also value an independent certification of green labeled products. And I think that just makes intuitive sense. You don't just want to hear what a company says, you need that to be externally validated to a high quality environmental standard. And that's really how our programs are moving, and the whole industry is shifting. Focus on measurement, data, verification. And again, the benefit of that is then we can see real ROI to build the business case for sustainability.
Alyssa, is there anything new that you're excited about with regards to customer innovation?
Yeah, I'm actually super excited about some new products that we've recently launched that are really based on feedback from the customer. And so we talked a lot earlier about how there's impacts all along the value chain. So when we think about the beginning of the value chain, some products that we have recently introduced to address that raw material impact is our Sustain series of bio-based plastics. And so that actually improves the Scope 3 carbon emissions of those associated products by sourcing materials that are of a bio-based instead of a fossil fuel-based plastic. So that's really exciting. And I know we already have some of our first shipments there, which is awesome. And, James is speaking about what it means to be a green lab, and you can't have a green lab without green products. So that's one example. And then when we think about how the products get used by our customers, we're really just continuing to innovate and answer the call around energy efficiency in those cold storage products to make sure that every piece of electricity has to get used to run that cold storage is really being optimized all the time. So I think, good interventions on both sides of the value chain there, and some exciting work that we're looking to continue to expand as we move forward.
And Thermo Fisher was recently honored, correct, with a sustainability award?
Oh, yes, of course. I should have mentioned that as well. We're really proud to have recently been awarded the Sustainable Supplier of the Year by Select Science. And what I'm really proud of with this recognition is that this is an award that's voted on by scientists. So it's super exciting that the people that are out in the lab using our products, thinking about how to make impact, are understanding what Thermo Fisher is trying to achieve here. And we have certainly still a long way to go. We're far from considering this achievement, but it's great to get some recognition along the way and to make sure that our teams are motivated to continue this really ambitious journey that we're on.
For me, someone who's not involved in your area of the business every day, it was really interesting for me to see that this is something that's really important to our customers. It's expected of us to do this, right? And desired of us to do this.
Yeah, it's really our guiding light. Even when we're setting these targets, certainly we're thinking about things like corporate reputation and what our shareholders and investors want. But most importantly, at the end of the day, we're serving our customers. And in the same way that our mission is to enable our customers to make the world healthier, cleaner, and safer, we're also enabling them to meet their own sustainability objectives. So all of these targets that we've set for ourselves are really in reflection of how do we help our customers achieve their stated objectives. And so we're really, I think, lucky in the life sciences and biopharma industry because our customer population is really committed to this work, and they've come together and they're working often side by side and hand in hand to establish shared objectives for the supply chain. And that's huge for a company like Thermo Fisher to make sure that we are giving not just one key customer what they need, but when our customers line up to a common set of objectives and expectations, it really allows us to perform and deliver what they all require.
Really interesting. Well, I hope this conversation has been enlightening and inspiring for our listeners, whether you have a background in lab work or you're simply interested in sustainability. So as we close, James and Alyssa, would you each share one useful recommendation that anyone can implement in their daily life to contribute to a more sustainable future? Alyssa, do you want to go first?
Sure. So when I think about how individuals can contribute, I think you should connect to what resonates with you. So for some people, that's doing something at their home, and maybe the impact is super hyper local, right? It's what building a garden or practicing your own home sustainable practices. And that's fantastic. It's a great way to, as James noted, engage your family and keep it really personal and real and tangible for you. The way that I've chosen to engage in sustainability is a little different, right? So we go super big and broad, and we think about how can we take a classic, large-scale company, global multinational, and maybe turn the tide. And maybe it's not always as fast, and maybe we don't see it every day, but we know that as we make these small changes, they result in ripple across very large impact across a very big network.
Thanks, Alyssa. James, how about you? What do you recommend?
Yeah, well, I love that answer, and I second it. I will just say, get started. I think in science, there's a little bit of fear. We always did it this way. It's hard to change. There's something that everybody can do. And I want to make a recommendation for one of our programs, the My Green Lab Ambassador Program. It's free. Anybody can take it online. You get a little badge that you can put on your LinkedIn profile or in your email signature that shows that you're interested and you want to move forward. And then we actually have curated this global community of 9,000 people all around the world. And like I said, it is amazing how often a single scientist that's interested in sustainability becomes an ambassador. They get inspired. They do a green lab certification. They encourage their vendors to get ACK labels. And all of a sudden, they've sparked a movement that can actually transform a whole lab or transform a whole business and the culture within that business. So there's no time to waste. Get started today. And we're here to support you and would love you to be part of our movement.
Great advice. And we'll put a link to My Green Lab on this page for people who want more information. And thank you, James and Alyssa, for your insights and for your time today. It was really enlightening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Science with a Twist. This podcast is brought to you by Thermo Fisher Scientific, the world leader in serving science. If you enjoyed this episode, then follow Science with a Twist wherever you get your favorite podcasts. Or join us online at thermofisher.com/sciencewithatwist for all of the latest episodes.